In the untamed Wild West, one rancher's act of mercy changed 2 lives forever. A story of redemption, courage, and unexpected love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Tell us, where are you watching from? Let's get started. The evening sun stretched long shadows across the plains of Arizona, turning the dusty landscape into an ocean of red and gold. A warm wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the distant cry of a hawk. Along the narrow dirt road leading into Red Hollow, a lone rider appeared. His name was Clayton Reed, a man of quiet strength and few words, his hat pulled low against the burning light. He wasn't a man who sought trouble, but trouble had a strange way of finding him in places where decency was rare and greed was common. Clayton's horse moved steadily, hooves beating a slow, tired rhythm against the earth. He had come into town for one purpose: to buy supplies for the ranch he'd spent 5 hard years building from nothing but dirt and stubborn will. He wasn't rich, but he was respected. Folks called him the kind of man who didn't bend easily even when life tried to break him. But what he didn't know that day was that fate had other plans. Ones that would change his quiet, lonely life forever. As he tied his horse outside the general store, the noise of the town reached him. Laughter, shouts, and the clang of bottles. It was auction day. Clayton didn't care much for crowds, but something about the ruckus near the square caught his attention. He followed the sound and stopped when he saw the crude wooden stage at the center of town. The people of Red Hollow had gathered, their eyes glinting with cruel amusement. And on that stage stood a thin, barefoot woman, her hands bound, her face pale beneath the harsh sun. The auctioneer was a thick man with a voice like gravel and a grin too wide for his face. He shouted above the noise, "Next up, a strong young woman can cook, clean, and do what a man needs done." The crowd laughed, tossing coins and jeering. The woman flinched but didn't cry. Her eyes, blue and steady, held a kind of quiet defiance, even as fear trembled beneath her calm. Clayton felt something tighten in his chest. He'd seen cruelty before, but never like this. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her auburn hair was tangled, her dress torn, and her shoulders bruised from the rough hands that had dragged her there. The auctioneer barked again. "Who'll start the bid?" $5, 10. A man in the crowd shouted, "10 for a night's work!" The crowd howled with laughter. Clayton's jaw clenched. He'd seen men become monsters when they thought no one cared enough to stop them. The woman kept her eyes low, her lips pressed tight, as though she'd already accepted whatever came next. The auctioneer's voice grew impatient. "She ain't got all day, gentlemen. Who's man enough to pay?" Another man raised his hand. 15! 20! Someone else countered. The laughter rose again. Clayton's fists curled at his sides. He hadn't planned on getting involved, but his conscience wouldn't let him walk away. The words came before he even thought them. $50, he said, loud and clear. The laughter died. Heads turned. Even the auctioneer's grin faltered. $50 was a fortune for a woman who looked like she hadn't eaten in days. The auctioneer blinked. "You serious, mister?" Clayton's eyes didn't waver. "You heard me." The gavel came down with a crack. "Sold to the rancher." The crowd murmured, disappointed that their show had ended. Clayton walked toward the stage, pulled a few bills from his coat and handed them over. Then he reached out his hand to the woman. She hesitated, her eyes uncertain. When she finally took it, her fingers were cold, trembling. "Come on," he said quietly. "You'll have food, clothes, and a roof. That's all I'm offering." She said nothing as he led her away, her bare feet stirring the dust. The crowd's whispers followed them down the street. When they reached his horse, she looked up at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but steady. "Why did you do it?" He looked away. "Didn't seem right what they were doing." She frowned slightly. "You paid for me. Now do it." Clayton's hand froze on the saddle. He turned to her, puzzled. "Do what?" Her voice cracked. "Whatever men do when they pay for women." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind brushed past them, lifting the edge of her hair. Clayton's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. "I didn't buy you for that," he said. "I bought you to keep you safe. You'll stay until you can stand on your own. Then you can go wherever you want." She blinked, unsure whether to believe him. In her world, kindness always came with a price. But when she looked at him, she saw no hunger in his eyes, only something she hadn't seen in a long time: decency. They rode in silence for hours, the stars beginning to bloom across the night sky. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the world reduced to the soft rhythm of hooves and the whisper of the wind. "Evelyn?" She finally told him her name, sat behind him on the horse, her arms loosely around his waist. Every bump on the trail sent pain through her tired body, but she didn't complain. When they reached the ranch, she looked up and gasped. It wasn't much, a wooden house, a barn, and open land, but to her, it was paradise. Clayton dismounted and helped her down. "You'll sleep inside," he said. "There's a spare room." She nodded, still unsure. Inside, the air smelled of wood and tobacco. He handed her a blanket, then pointed toward the small bed by the window. "You can wash in the morning. I'll make breakfast." She looked at him as though he were speaking another language. "Why are you being kind?" she asked quietly. He shrugged. "Because somebody ought to be." She turned away, holding back tears she hadn't allowed herself in years. That night, as she lay under the blanket, Evelyn stared out the window at the moon. She thought about the rancher who had bought her not for her body, but for her freedom. She couldn't understand it. Men didn't do that, not in this world. Yet something about him felt different. He didn't talk much, but his silence was honest, not cold. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of rain beginning to fall outside, and for the first time since she could remember, she slept without fear. Clayton sat alone in the next room, a small fire flickering in the hearth. He thought about the woman sleeping under his roof, a stranger whose pain had somehow found its way into his heart. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He wasn't looking for a wife or even company. But as the firelight danced on the walls, he felt something shift deep inside. A reminder that even in a land as rough and unforgiving as the West, there was still room for mercy. The next morning, the sky was pale and clear, washed clean by the night's rain. Clayton saddled his horse and glanced toward the small room. The door was open, and Evelyn stood there in the sunlight, wearing one of his old shirts. She looked fragile but alive. When their eyes met, she gave him a small, uncertain smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell him he'd done the right thing. Out there, among outlaws and dust, decency was rare. But sometimes, all it took was one good man to remind the world it still existed.